Hey everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. My name's Michael. I'm here with Cristie for an amazing episode of our podcast series for the Raise Adult Ally Project. And this project really is to really help adults everywhere, help young people, really anyone, right, understand what an adult ally is, how we can all make a difference, and really how to help support young people and really help to make sure everyone has not only a place at the table, but that table um, is really accessible and meaningful for everyone anywhere to really know they can get the support they need. So, Cristie, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm excited you're here because for our listeners, Cristie really is known in many circles as a great adult ally. And so when we were doing this project and brainstorming of who can we really have a meaningful, powerful conversation, Cristie, you are one of our top people that immediately came to mind because you are just I don't want to speak for you, but in our brief, shorter time knowing each other, I've just seen how people respond to you, your presence, just who you are as a person. And so I'm just really grateful and curious to really learn not only about you, but just kind of your approach and really the A to Z nuts and bolts of allyship and what that means to you.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you. And I agree. I feel like we've known each other since what, like January?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, yeah, we've had like really good conversations. So yeah, when you reached out to me about this, I was like, that would be an amazing conversation to have. So I'm pumped.
Awesome. Well, I'm just going to dive right in and really just off the bat, Cristie, what does
Mhm.
being an adult ally mean to you, and how did you come to see yourself in that role?
So I think when I think of being an adult ally, I think of like consistently showing up for young people with disabilities. And this is something that I talk about even just like generally in terms of advocacy is it's not like a one and a done, you did it, you advocated, you're done. And that's sort of how I view allyship too, like being there for youth over and over again in whatever capacity they need. So not just like speaking up for them, but being right alongside of them and making sure that they are really the ones that are kind of like leading
Mhm.
whatever cause they want to be talking about. So it's really just, listening. It's sort of stepping away whenever I feel like I need to. And if I can use, my experiences and, whatever stories I have to sort of help them along the way, then I'm definitely going to do that. But I also feel like I try to leave space for them to step up and sort of start making their own stories and like use mine to guide them, but not necessarily overshadow it. And I feel like I've started seeing myself in this role really within the past few years, I'll say, as like, personal experience, like transitioning into my 30s, but then also just through my work. So, for anyone listening who does not know, I am a pediatric occupational therapist and I am the youth training and leadership coordinator for the Peel Center, which is Pennsylvania's parent training and information center. So I really work with young people with disabilities in sort of two different capacities. And it's really in both of these roles that I've sort of started to shift my approach to, again, do that like supporting role, making sure if I'm, forming OT goals that they're very person centered and that I'm really asking the client I'm working with, like, what do you see for what you want to accomplish in therapy? But then also in my peel work and asking them, where do you see your life going? What's your, overall goal after transition? And how am I going to support you getting there and not tell you how, like, where to go, if that makes sense?
Oh, it totally does, totally does. And I may have made a reaction, maybe I didn't, but when you said, "Oh, in my 30s," I'm like, "Yep, we can talk." Like I'm in my 30s too, and so I'll talk about that later in a minute. I'll ask you really about like again allyship and stages of that and what was that transition like. But I think what jumped out to me, Cristie, is many things I think too I want to talk about is one, going back to what you said is consistently being there. for youth and young adults. And I think that is so important. I think with all the young people we collaborate with and we support and we work with, I think that, not speaking for everyone, but I think that consistency is, I'd honestly say, safely in the top 3 to 5 things of what they would say is really important for an ally. I think it's really meaningful you brought that up because I've had some really honest conversations with some young people that, they've kind of told me, said, hey, Michael, I'm honestly a little hesitant sometimes because some adults that have been supporting me have kind of in the beginning been all gung ho and then it quickly fizzled out or no contact or what have you, right? And so I'm curious, Cristie, what is that like even on a day you may not be really feeling 100% or like, things may be going on in your own life, right? That make it harder to be consistent or show up. But I just love to hear your thoughts on what kept you staying the course, being consistent, even when times were tough or things were going on.
Honestly, just being honest about that and owning that and letting them know, like, hey, maybe I'm not 100% today. Because I think that also is good for them to hear because, everybody's got bad days, you're feeling off, or it's just, hey, there is a lot on my plate right now. And even if it's just a check in saying, like, hey, I can't maybe 100% answer this question right now, but like, please know that I saw it and that it's on my mind. And that whenever I have, the bandwidth to really commit to this, I'd love to dig in deeper. But it's at least doing that like initial, hey, I am still here, and letting them know, like, you didn't just read it and forget about it, but like saying, hey, sorry, like, I've got a busy day. Like, I'm going to really dedicate time to answer this tomorrow. And I think that number one, that shows that it's okay to set a boundary. Like, if you are really just not feeling it and you really just need like to take a beat, it shows that, that's totally fine. And as long as you can acknowledge that and say, like, this is still very important to me and I'm still going to be here and we're going to talk about this, just like, if you could give me a little bit of patience, I think that is sort of a way that I've sort of tried to handle it.
Mm. And that's such a really good universal skill, Cristie. I think like that, like no matter like who you are, where you are in life, having that like, hey, here's what's going on, here's what I can do, here's what I'm
Mhm.
willing and able to do, right? That's such a cool thing to model, So that's I'm trying to think that like if someone I know people did that for me. I don't have like a memory I can like draw and like reflect with you right now. But the
I
other
will
thing,
say that did not come easy. So anyone listening, like, don't be like, man, Chrissy's got it. Like, that took me so long to be like, number one, to learn how to do it, and number two, to be okay with doing it, because I am very much a person that cannot say no.
mm,
And it took a really long time for me to be like, all right, I'm going to be most effective when I can like really set that boundary for myself when I need to.
mm,
But it
mm.
was not an easy skill to learn.
Mhm. Well, I think you're bringing up Cristie. I think, right, when you are supporting young people and as an ally, those boundaries can come in place, right? Because we all have limits on what we can and can't do. Like I've told some young adults, hey, I'm not really available at all hours of the day and night. Like, so
Yep.
if you are in an extreme situation, here's resources for you where you can go. Like that's one easy
Mm-hmm.
example off the top of my head. That's like it's setting that limit so so those young people in my life know, hey, Michael M4 over here can get you like really normal business hours sometime at night, but don't be calling me at 3 a.m. if you
Right.
need a ride somewhere or some or what have you, right? And
Yep.
so that's like a really simple, not always easy conversation to have, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to say, at least for me, and sounds like for you too, when I've had those conversations, whether it's verbally, over text, email, it's gone pretty well. That I've not
Mm-hmm.
really had a moment where like a young person was like really against that. Like they've really always respected that. And if there is a point where maybe we can talk about this later on today or in another, another way for our toolkit. But I think it's really good that we talk about ways to empower and prepare allies for, because you mentioned this, Cristie, is you're someone who has had a hard time saying no. And so I think that's something that there's ways to say no with respect, and there's ways to say no that kind of honor what you can and can't do. And it's also very protective for you as an ally, but also for young adults, helping them to model, hey, you're allowed to say no too.
Right. It's sort of, yeah, it sets that example that, you want to be in it, right? You want to be doing everything and you want to just be super involved, but it's okay to acknowledge that you are a human and maybe you can't do everything all right now. And maybe it's also the discussion of like, hey, I can't commit to this right now, but like maybe in a couple weeks when things calm down, like I'd love to revisit this, something like that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so true. And I do want to touch on, before I go to my next question, Cristie, is, I loved what you mentioned in kind of your ally experiences where you're, and sharing, out what, kind of your experiences. You've really asked some really good questions for your young people in your life, both in your OT role and in your coordinator role. Like, what does XYZ, like, what does your future hold for you, or what, so I've just noticed that sometimes just asking those really simple but powerful questions. You've talked about being a guide, not necessarily being, you're not telling what a young person what to do, but you're kind of just almost giving them space to kind of say, wow, like, what do I want to do? And that's such a really powerful thing. Is there anything else you want to share about that more for our listeners?
I think a lot of that comes from my own personal experiences. So, growing up, like I was born with my physical disability. I've used a power wheelchair since I was 8 years old. And so I really honestly went through a lot of these same systems that I'm seeing other young adults go through myself. And so I look back on it and think, what would I have wanted someone to do for me in this role? And, growing up, no one really ever had the conversation of, what do you want to do after high school? And when I was in high school, I was not, OT/youth coordinator was not on my bingo card. I was going to be a forensic scientist. And I was like in the lab, I was a lab girly. And it was either met with like, oh, like the skepticism,
Mm.
or just no one really knew what to say about it. And so I didn't have anyone that was like, other than, my immediate family and support system, who was very much in support of this and, helping me get to where I wanted to go. But in terms of the school or, just anything like that, like they were trying, but I don't think they necessarily knew like how to help guide me specifically through this process. And it's really interesting because I have an identical twin sister. And so it was sort of like seeing myself go through this and then seeing my twin sister go through this, and just like how different it sort of looked between the two of us. So now I look back and I think, okay, I didn't need anybody to tell me what to do and how to do it. I just needed them to say, like, here are some resources and here are the tools you might need to do this. And hey, I'm here to support you however I can. So that's really how I come at it.
Mm. And, Cristie, as you were sharing too, I think, and maybe this is like a side topic, but like, I just feel like I moved to like share this with you and our listeners, is I almost feel like too, it's so powerful asking those questions, because especially, at least for me, and in some of my experiences in the disability world, right? Like, how often do people really ask us genuinely, like, what do you want? Like, there's so many assumptions, and people, with my brain injury and my mental health challenges, I've had moments in my life, especially when I was younger, where people made assumptions, talked about me, over me, threw
Mhm.
me at me, like, when like very few
Every
like
direction,
actually
right?
said like every direction, but like to my face, in
Yep.
like a nice conversation, right? And so, as you were sharing, just I want to, acknowledge that what can seem really simple and obvious, I think, has not been collectively a common experience through disability community. So I think I just want to acknowledge and kind of like make sure our listeners understand, and as we're really having this bigger conversation, right? We it's it, Again, call to action is
Mhm.
so much positive change can happen when you just do your best, talk with people, find out what they want, how you can support them, and be open just to doing what they want, not what you think would be best for someone.
Yep.
I know you've talked a little bit about this, Cristie, so far, but is there any other moment where you're like, oh, like this was a really powerful like learning moment for me, really meaningful, in your work with young people as an ally?
Yeah, I think I've had two that are sort of jumping out at me immediately. One was just a couple weeks ago, actually. I had an event, like an in person young adult event in Pittsburgh. And this was an event, honestly, about all of this, talking with transition age young adults who we were sort of going through, what did they see their futures after high school looking like? And it was really a hands on opportunity for them to come hear a little bit about, the Peel Center and another organization called Life's Work of Western PA, and talk about transition planning, but mainly making sure that they knew that their voices were at the center of it. And then it finished where there were different job simulation rooms that they got to go around and explore to see if it's something they would be of interest in. And I was speaking with a young adult like during that like simulation time, just sort of about, where they generally saw their futures going. And I had asked, how old they were. They were 16. And I said, like, oh, have you been attending your IEP meetings if you have an IEP? And they said, yes, I have been attending every meeting since, I've been able to. And not once has anyone ever asked me what I actually want. And that I think just really like hit me because while I had a 504 plan, I did not have an IEP, but it was still just hearing like, I'll date myself now. What is it? 20 years after I was in high school? Something like that. Like, yeah, 20 years or whatever it is after I was in high school, that like, that is still quote unquote the norm, is that like this young adult had never been asked in the 2 years they've been attending IEP meetings what they wanted. And I tried to really emphasize, okay, now that you attended this session, like hopefully now you see like this, like your voice really needs to be driving these things, and that you absolutely have every right to speak up first in your IEP meetings. And we sort of tried to like go through quickly, what that looked like, different communication strategies they could use. I gave them my card and I was like, email me if you want help before your next IEP meeting. Like, I am here to support you. But that one really hit me, that all these years later. And I was like, yeah. And I said, I feel like I had a very similar experience with my 504 plans, and it is frustrating, it's hard, but, you know, you need to be at the center of these decisions. And please feel that you can speak up. And if you feel like you need support, let me know and I will gladly help you through that. So I think that was one. And then a similar ish one was for my OT role, because I see kids virtually who are attending cyber schools. And I was in an IEP meeting for one of my kids, and his mom was talking about going into the transition class next year and just some skills that she was hoping he could learn now along the lines of problem solving and executive function. And it was sort of being written off as like, yeah, he'll learn that during the transition class next year, like no biggie. And she was like, well, is there anything that can be done now? And I sort of like raised my hand. I said, hi, I'm OT. We can absolutely work on this right now. And then afterward, we had a discussion, me and her son, about just sort of what his goals were and what maybe he thought he was needing some help with. And it was similar that he said no one has ever tried to do like problem solving or helping him think through how to figure these things out. And I said, why do you think that is? And he said, because I think no one thinks I can do it. And I was just like, and I was like, I'm sorry that that has been your experience so far. And I can't imagine how frustrating it is, but that's something we're going to work on together. And we sort of built, what does that look like? What's going to work well for him? And we're sort of starting to try and build that up a little bit.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing that, Cristie. I
Sorry,
think
I told you
no,
I'm a talker.
no. It's got me thinking. I think for both of these experiences, right? I want to acknowledge that lives are at stake, right? For all of you listening, watching with us, I think, and it's heartbreaking, right? That in both your examples, these young people have never been asked, "What do you want? What would work? Is this okay? Like, how do you feel about this?" These are all basic things, and it is heartbreaking that as a system, um, these are common experiences, and I think, so I don't want to gloss over this and it to be taken lightly. I think, um, I want to go back to, I think, from your second story, Cristie, that it is really powerful. And it's a shame that that young person said to you when you said, why do you think it is? That they said, oh, I don't think they feel like I can do it. And I've certainly have felt that way in my own life at certain
Mm-hmm.
periods. I don't want to speak for you, Cristie. I think many of us in the disability community certainly have had that collective experience. And I think
Yep.
um it's a conversation worth highlighting that that is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've really started thriving when I had people in my life who could see beyond where I was now. And even if I took a different road to get to the destination, they still believed in me and supported me and guided along with me to help get me there. And that's what it's all about. So um, I'm a little emotional. I'm not gonna cry or anything, but it's just I think it's hitting home, right? This is why we
Mm-hmm.
do what we do. There are
Yep.
young people out there, adults out there who have had experiences of not not even one having one positive experience. And so I think this is why, again, thank you to the Raise Center for funding this project because,
Mm-hmm.
we really want to equip raise awareness on allyship that we all can do things to make the world a better place, to help people move forward, to really impact meaningful change. And there's moments when as we've been working on this project, Cristie, it keeps coming back to like every single like survey, every like podcast recording. A lot of it really is stemming back to I just wanted someone to listen to me, to hear
Mm-hmm.
me out, no judgment, no, no anger, like just to like meet me where I'm at, to just ask me
Mm-hmm.
things, listen. Um, and honestly, as with this project, I'm not surprised by these answers, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's reaffirming like this is what needs to happen. Do you have any other thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on that?
I was just gonna say, honestly, I don't even think you don't even necessarily have to have your own like disability experience to like inform this work. Like I think just in general, adults recognizing that they need to be there to listen, to support, and to encourage young people with disabilities is just so important. Like you said, like, you don't necessarily, like, yes, I have my own experiences that inform a lot of what I do, and I really do bring that to my work. And maybe you have that, and that's fantastic. And if you are comfortable to incorporate that, then all the better. But even just like for anyone to just have the ability to listen and to not make like knee jerk reactions to things, because I think, especially with my second example of, him thinking that, oh, people just don't think I can do it. His mom told me that a lot of times it was just, they would write it off as, oh, he's not following directions, or he's got behaviors, which I hate behaviors. But I said, I was like, well, has anyone, written the directions a different way? Or has anyone like broken them down into smaller directions, anything like this? And the answer was no. And I'm just, I just think anybody, regardless of what your personal experience with disability has been, anybody can come into this situation and try to view it as not deficit based. So I'm not going to try and see, oh, what's wrong, but okay, he's such a bright kid. He's, such a great kid. Like, how are we going to adapt this to fit what he needs it to be so that he can, and, problem solve and do all of these things? So I think just generally anybody is able to listen, be supportive, be encouraging for the young adults they're working with.
No, thank you so much, Cristie. And then my last question I had prepared is, and you've talked about this already, so much wisdom, Cristie, again, thank you. But is there any advice you'd really give to someone who wants to be a better ally?
I'm going to piggyback off of what I just said a little bit, because I really think that like starting by listening is definitely the biggest thing that you need to do. But I'll add on that don't just passively listen. And what I mean by that is like, don't just, nod along like you're going to listen to them and just not, implement anything they're telling you. And so do active listening. And also don't be afraid to challenge your own thinking and to maybe unlearn some things. So I think if you're an adult in this role, maybe things are a little bit different than they were when you were growing up. And maybe you're going to have to unlearn that a little bit to work with this, next generation of young adults with disabilities. Honestly, just earlier today, I was having a discussion about, person first versus identity first language. And I grew up in my family, and my parents used person first language when they talked about me. And all growing up, I used person first language. And it wasn't until maybe like 5 years ago when I was really trying to combat some of the like internalized ableism I was feeling and really getting involved in my own self advocacy, and then advocacy as a broader concept, that I started using identity first language. And I think, people, obviously it's my life, people were supportive of the shift, but I think it's, it's something you have to unlearn a little bit, is to use maybe what your preferred language is. And that's just one example of something that you might have to shift your thinking around. And not every person is going to be the same, right? Everyone's got a different preference for how they want to talk about their disability. I always say the best practice for me is just asking, and for me, it's sort of, if you're going to introduce yourself and maybe you share pronouns and maybe you share, and if you're talking about disability, I prefer identity first language. And then that just sort of sets the stage that they know how you choose to use, and you can also then share how you choose to do that too. So I think that's one thing that I would say is, not being afraid to challenge your own thinking. And then the second big piece of advice would be being really intentional about creating spaces for youth to be leaders. And again, maybe that means stepping back and taking a little bit more of that like passenger role and not being the driver, but you can still use your connections. You can still help open doors for young people, but giving them the space to really lead that and, you know, being a safety net there if they need it. But I think those would be my two biggest pieces of advice.
Those are amazing. Thank you so much, Cristie. And I think I want to be respectful of your time, but I think there's one kind of final question that's come in my mind. I'd love for you to even just for like a quick second on is I think really at the heart of our conversation has been relationships, right? And I
Mhm.
would love to hear from you on, you've talked so much about how to, we talked about boundaries, how to prepare not only yourself as an ally, but young people, how, really talking about the A to Z of communication and asking questions and staying curious, but being open to change. Um, I'm not going to ask about a moment that maybe went wrong or different, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what could someone do if they felt a relationship was damaged or, oh, maybe I didn't like if from the past I did things differently that weren't maybe the best or the most effective. I'd love to kind of hear, yeah, just how do how do you repair or go about like because we're all human, we're not perfect, we're gonna
Mhm.
make mistakes. I'm the first one on this recording. I've made like a million and one mistakes, right? And I guess there's times where I wish I could turn back the hands of time. I'd have
Mhm.
said something different or not have said something, or like, there's moments where I felt like I let someone else down. And there's
Mhm.
times where I did reach out to that person and talked it through and like made amends. And there's a few times where like I've still felt like, oh, maybe there is a little bit of a distance between us. And not that I'm gonna sit here and blame myself forever, but I think it's really important that we're talking about relationships. And has
Mhm.
there been a moment or any advice on like what happens if a conversation or a moment with someone could have gone a little differently?
Yeah. An example immediately jumped into my head, and it was one of the first webinars that I had designed and was putting on. And, you know, I had targeted it that it was going to be for youth and young adults. And I definitely had some of those on the call. And then I definitely had some parents on the call too. And things got a little bit off the rails, we'll say. And it became a little bit more parent focused than I intended it to be. And I did have one of the young adults on the call very respectfully call me out, not during the call or anything, it was afterward, but they sort of just expressed their concern that this was supposed to be for young adults. The way that the objectives were written, the way that some of the material was presented leaned a little bit more toward a parent focus, they thought, and they didn't feel that enough space was given for them to really express their thoughts and to feel seen, like when I was doing these interactive elements. And it was an opportunity for me, like you said, like you had to reach out. Like I reached out to them and I said, thank you for letting me know, number one. And so I think that's number one is if
Mhm.
someone calls you on it, it's really hard not to have your reaction be like, oh, like they're wrong. Like I know I did this the right way, but to really be like introspective and think, okay, did I screw up? And so I went back and I read the objectives and I was like, you know what? I can see how these are not exactly like young adult focused. And I can see why a parent felt the need, or not the need, but like felt that they could really be more present in this webinar than I thought they would be. And then I could see why the young adult was frustrated with that. So I reached out and I said, like, number one, thank you for calling me on this. And then I apologized and I said, I'm growing in my role as an adult ally and being in this position. And with that is going to take a little bit of like learning on my part. This was, one of the first things that I've done for this. And so I'm sort of learning alongside of you. And, I appreciate the feedback and that I can fix this for next time. And, if there's anything further that you want to talk about and any other feedback you would like to give me, like I'm open to receiving that. So it was sort of like thanking them for letting me know I did something wrong, apologizing and letting them know, hey, here's my action plan to fix it. And number three, if there's any other things that you feel I should know and that you would like to share with me, I'm very open to receiving that. And then we had a great little email exchange, and they appreciated that I actually reached out to them and that I was open to their feedback and that I would correct things. And they said that's sort of all I wanted, was to make sure you knew and thank you for actually acknowledging me. And then that was fine. But you're going to have those moments where you don't necessarily get it right. And that's okay, I think, as long as you can acknowledge that you are willing to learn and to correct things. I think that means a lot to young adults.
I agree. And I think it was really courageous. And I think, you made yourself vulnerable and reaching out. But I think, I'm so glad to hear that, you repaired that. You had a great conversation with that young adult over email. And I'm sure now, right? Like, because I've certainly had my own moments where like, oh shoot, I like totally, but it's almost like that muscle, right? Like now when it happens again, what maybe felt like a 20 out of 10, like, oh my God, Michael, like you're horrible. What are you doing? Like that's just like the internal chatter, right? Now,
Yep.
if it happens again, maybe it only feels like a 7 out of 10. Like it's easier over time, right? It's for me, it's that muscle of like, okay, like we're humans, right? So I think going forward, like any job or relationship or role that involves other humans, there's going to be mistakes. So I think it's encouraging. And again, thank you for sharing your own experiences on that. I just kind of felt called to like, I don't know, as our time's kind of coming to a close for this recording, I just felt like asking you that, and I'm really glad I did, Cristie.
No, I am too, because you're so right. It's important to point out that it might not always go right, but if you can just have like a healthy conversation about it. And I also told them, I was like, hey, this is self-advocacy, right? Like you are living it right now. Like you are advocating for what you think that this webinar should be. And props to you.
Yeah. So on that note, Cristie, is there anything else on your mind before we close out our recording, or do you feel complete?
I feel like we hit it all pretty well. So I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there, listening to me ramble on. But it's been awesome chatting with you, Michael, and hopefully someone takes something good away from this.
I know they will, Cristie. Thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you to the Ray Center for funding this project. And again, so grateful to be here with Cristie. And bye for now, everyone.
Bye, guys.